Hello, fellow storytellers. This is Mark Graham with the Source of Story YouTube channel and Runes for Writers. In this video, we're going to continue with our series on the runes themselves, their meanings, their sound values, their expressions in their shape, and also their interpretation and contribution in your story. So this is an interesting, we're beginning the second row, or the second 8 of the runes. We'll do the first half of those. And this will be our only series of 4 runes in which none of the runes can be reversed. We've talked about in previous episodes, we'll talk about them again, obviously, in later episodes, of the meaning of a rune when it appears upright in your rune casting, and what happens when it's upside down or reversed. These 4 runes, this series, none in this series can be reversed. They are what they are. We'll also find that the first 3 of these runes, sometimes the 4th, though much more rarely, but the first 3 of these runes in traditional rune casting, if you look at books by other experts in the runes, we'll typically find these first 3 runes as negative, that they, regardless obviously of how they appear, they're going to appear only in one way, but their flat interpretation is viewed as negative. And I will take a different view. I guess my outlook has a bit more equanimity in it, in that the rune is what it is. It can be perceived or received as positive or negative. It may be challenging, but I view challenges as a good thing. Without challenge, we don't grow. And so that is a personal philosophy. That's how I try to approach life, but that's also how I envisage these runes, both from the standpoint of the interpreter of the runes, and as looking from my character or the viewpoint of the scene, how they will receive and experience the rune. And in one point of the story, having one of these runes show up could be disastrous. In a different part of the story, a different sequence, a different cycle in the story, they could be seen as inspiring and as fostering great change and improvement in the situation. So when we think about challenging runes, whether it be these that have no reversal, or if we're looking at reversed runes in other sequences, bear that in mind, that it may be perceived at a surface level as a negative, but if you dig down into it, you may find that there's an opportunity for growth, for success, for positive change for your character. So bear that in mind as you interpret any of the runes in your story, but particularly when you come across some of these these runes that are perceived as more challenging than others. So with that, let's get started. And our first rune in this cycle is Hagalaz. And Hagalaz has the H sound, the H sound value. Its literal meaning is hail. And in the ancient Norse cosmology, the myths that deal with the creation of the universe, or at least our part of the universe that we perceive, we had 2 of the 9 realms. We had Muspelheim, which is the fire home, and Niflheim, which is mist home or water home. And these are 2 of the 2 earliest realms to come out of the primordial void of Ginnunga Gap, the yawning chasm. You have these 2 realms, the realm of fire and the realm of water, on each side of this void, this vast chasm. And the fire from Muspelheim leapt across the void and contacted the ice of Niflheim and began melting it and even evaporating it. And the steam that rose from the ice then condensed. It fell in rain or hail. In the case of Hagalaz, its meaning is literally hail, the icy precipitation that falls from the sky. And that hail would fall back to the ground, be absorbed back into the ice, only to be heated up again from that fire of Muspelheim. And so we have this ascending and descending. It's the same way that hail forms. The upcurrents in a storm will push the water droplets far up into the atmosphere where it's much, much colder, and these will condense and accrete more moisture into them. That excessive weight now will fall back into the heart of the storm, where it encounters those stronger updrafts. Once more, they're cast back up into the sky, and that cycle repeats, and the hailstone grows and grows and grows until its mass under gravity outweighs the ability of the updrafts in the storm to force them back up into the clouds again, and they fall to the earth as hail. And this is the cycle that took place in creation, as that mist rose and condensed and fell and rose and condensed and fell again. It eventually grew until the fire of Muspelheim was no longer able to melt and evaporate it, and it formed the first matter in the known system. And out of this matter came brine, came the first primordial life, the first living being, according to Norse mythology, came out of this briny mass, which was the interaction between fire and mist, between fire and ice, if you're a George R.R. Martin fan. And that is how I view this symbol of Hagalaz. You have Muspelheim on one side, you have Niflheim on the other, and you have that bridge across Ginnungagap, across the void, that yawning chasm. And that is what we see in Hagalaz. So the hail that is represented by Hagalaz can be seen as this destructive force. It can also represent the beginning of something new, of an evolution, of purification. Now, where I live in Colorado, we have not quite as many forms of precipitation as the Norse had. They had maybe a dozen different words for various forms of precipitation, and probably 5 or 6 for different levels of snowfall in and of itself. And we're getting into that time of year. We may actually see our first snow here in a few days or a couple weeks. And there's something magical about that time of year. When that first heavy snowfall comes, there's a blanket that's just thrown over the world, and everything goes silent. It's muffled. There's a stillness, an ethereal quality that happens with that first snowfall. And that is one manner, that is maybe the gentlest manner of this purification that Hagalaz represents. And that can go as far as a hailstorm. Both are means and methods of purification, but there's a different intensity and a different strength and force that accompanies them. I view this as, again, I try to view these things as I've experienced them personally in my life, and also try to view them from the point of view of your character. Purification is a necessity. It's a fact of life. How that purification is received, how well the character is prepared for this purification to come about, will impact its dramatic import to your story. If the character recognizes that, I'm kind of done with that, portion of the story of my life, and I'm ready for something new. The purification comes as a warm bath where you just rinse off the old, dry off, rinse off, towel off, and you're ready for something new. It could be as gentle and subtle as that. If the character is grasping and clinging to those aspects of which the story, you, the main author, are trying to cleanse them, then it may take the force of a hailstorm to knock off that detritus, that debris, and just knock them down until all that's left is their core, and that's what they have to start with. So those are the extremes of Hagalaz, and you, obviously, with your creative license, can take that anywhere within that spectrum, maybe even push the bounds of that spectrum a little bit farther than I've given you here. But this is the nature of Hagalaz when it shows up in your rune casting. It's that bridge between the two worlds, between fire and ice. It's that passage across this deep chasm. You can see this as a rope bridge that's wobbly and shaky. And you can, depending on, again, how it falls in the story, how it falls in the rune casting, the crossing of that bridge may in and of itself be in jeopardy, and that could be part of the purification in this part of the story. And that is Hagalaz, the 9th rune, the first rune of the second 8 or second row of the Elder Futhark. Next up is Nauthiz. Nauthiz means need or emergency. So you can get how this is typically interpreted as a negative rune. You have this dire circumstance, this emergency that has occurred. And that may well be an appropriate interpretation of it. I, again, with my personal philosophy, my personal outlook, I tend to look at this, or prefer to look at this, as a necessity that is the mother of invention, that is the growth point or an offering point for innovation. I look at the shape of this rune as a bow drill, right, where you have your stave and the bow, and you are rubbing these together, spinning the bow or the drill component of the bow drill to make fire. And for the ancients, can you imagine being the one to figure this out, to innovate this means of making fire from this great need of living in the northern climates and having many months of the year where it's damn cold. So to have that cold with you, and you can occasionally find a lightning strike. You may find remnants of an old fire, or perhaps someone has carried fire with them from another village, another tribe. But to be able to bring fire with you, to create it out of nothing except your ingenuity and your innovation, your intuition, to reach into this creative realm. How much trial and error did it take? I need fire, I need warmth, I need to be able to boil water and cook food. From that need to the practical application and the ability to create that fire. So again, this Nauthiz represents a spectrum from need to innovation to need met. And that is what we see in this rune. Once more, as with all the runes, it falls to you and to your creative license and to the needs of the story of how this rune can be interpreted and what its outcome will happen to be. But this is Nauthiz in a nutshell, that that necessity, the circumstances that require something, that impose a need upon the characters and the situation, and that may or may not result in something new. That need may persist and it creates a failure, a gap, or that need may occur and it sparks something new, some new innovation in your story, or a new outlook for your character to accomplish, to address that need. This is Nauthiz, our 10th rune, and the second rune of the second 8 of the Elder Futhark. Next up is Isa. And Isa literally means ice. You can see that in the shape of this rune, in its equivalency to an icicle forming. Now, the traditional reading of this is stop. Everything comes to a frozen standstill. It can also be seen as ego. It's often interpreted as an overbearing ego, and you see this in this big letter I. And that it's a valid interpretation, but a broader sense of this is, yes, there is individuality, there is separation. I think of this as looking at the roof of a shelter that has been covered with snow, and the sun comes out for the couple of hours a day that maybe it comes out in the Nordic climes, and it heats up a portion of that melt water begins to drip off, but as soon as it's out of that sunlight, it again begins to freeze. And soon, out of this indistinguishable mass of snow, you have this individualized, this individuated icicle. And that, for me, is the true essence of humanity, of individualization. We, getting a little deep into the philosophy here, but we have a common basis. We spring from a common well. We are merely individuated in this personality, in this physical body. So that is, again, a spectrum of how you can look at this rune, as that individuation, as integrity. And when I use integrity, I use that in the sense both of, being in personal integrity, of being righteous and moral and just, but also integrity as being a whole. We have our whole numbers, 1, 2, 3. These are integral numbers. They are complete in themselves. They are not decimals. They're not blending into the numbers around them. So this stands for the character as being fully individualized, as standing in and within themselves, standing within their integrity. It could stand for isolation. It could stand for being separated from the rest. So there are two sides, even though this rune cannot be reversed. That notion of individuality, again, has somewhat of a spectrum and a variety in how it can be interpreted. So when this rune appears, you can apply the sense of the character or the scene, the situation to which it applies, standing alone, standing up, or standing apart, standing isolated, having no choice but to stand alone because there's no one else to stand with her. And that is a rough interpretation of this rune. Again, you have full creative responsibility, and how and where the rune shows up will help influence how you interpret and apply this rune to your story. But that is Isa, Ice, the 11th rune, and the 3rd rune of the second 8. Next up, we have Jera. And in contradiction to the previous 3 runes, Jera is almost universally seen as a positive rune, very similar to Gebo, which we saw in the last video. And Jera literally means year. You can see this etymologically. This is where our word year comes from. In most interpretations, it's tended to be seen specifically as relating to the harvest. I see this as a scythe or a sickle scything through a stalk of wheat as these come together. That's kind of the mnemonic that I use to remember what rune this is. So about this time of year, late summer, early autumn, is the time of year associated with Jera. The harvest is being brought in. And so there's a sense of celebration. There's a sense of completion, of fulfillment, of assurance that the harvest has come in, and this will see us through the winter that's approaching and into the spring, into the new hope that lies ahead. As with what we'll see in Dagash, when we get to that in the final video of this series, is where that will occur. And also, Wunyo has a sense of completion. Gebo has a sense of gift. But Jera is unique in that there's an implied sense of patience. So over the course of this year, of this cycle, obviously there was a planting, there was a sowing, there was a period, though, of maturation and of growth, during which there was not much to do. In a household garden, you may go out and weed and tend the garden, but for a large field, at least in ancient times, there wasn't much to do. They weren't spray dusting. They weren't crop dusting or fertilizing the fields. They planted the fields, and then they went out Viking. They went out raiding or going to war or hunting, while the earth did its thing and brought the crops into fruition, into fulfillment. So there's a sense of the waiting is over with this rune. That harvest time has come. There's a sense of cooperation. And I did my part by sowing the seeds. The earth did its part in bringing those seeds into turning them into crops, and now I go back out to do my part to bring that in and there's labor associated obviously with that harvest, but there's a receiving of the bounty of the earth, of the fruits of one's labor, of cooperation between humanity and the earth, between humanity and the gods. The harvest would have been associated with the Vanir, which were separate and distinct from the Aesir, which we talked about in the last video, the Os. The Vanir were gods of the earth, of fertility, of wheat and beer and wine and dance and reproduction and the sea and all the things that make up physical existence. These things are the purview of the Vanir, of the terrestrial deities. And so this harvest time is a bringing in, a fulfillment, and a cooperation. So this rune Jera is all of these things. It is that cooperation. It is the harvest. It is the bringing in. It is promise. It is assurance, insurance, against the winter that is about to come. So generally, again, this rune is seen as quite positive, as good things happening. It can also be a foreshadowing of trying times ahead, that winter is coming. But there is an underlying sense of hope and a certainty, a certainty of the cyclical nature of things. Another interpretation of this Jera could be as a gear. Now, I don't know that the Norse ancestors were too mechanically inclined when this rune was given shape, but you see in these interlocking leaves where I've seen it as a scythe or a sickle scything through a sheaf of wheat. You can also see these as gears intermeshing. So there's a sense of the wheel of the year, the wheel of fate even. So while we're bringing in the harvest, we're preparing for the winter, we're storing up some seed for next spring, and we know that come next summer, the earth will again do its thing while we go back out to battle. And there's this cyclical process that continues and continues and continues. So right now, let's enjoy the harvest. Let's make our harvest beer. Let's set up our mead and get that first pressing of the wine, knowing that tougher times are ahead, but we're going to get through this. So that is Jera. That is the 12th rune, the 4th rune of the second 8. And that, my friends, is it for this particular installment. So if you've enjoyed this video, I encourage you to please like, subscribe to this channel, share the channel with your fellow writers, and let's get the word out on what Runes for Writers is all about. I would encourage you to please, if you haven't already done so, check out our crowdfunding campaign on Indiegogo. We are developing the cards, the tiles, and the dice sets, along with the various rune castings to apply these to your story. Your support will get you whichever level of these tools that you choose, and will also help me to generate more and more and more of these so that we can spread the word and get these into more hands and really help writers come more into their creative, just give their creative facility, to give them another really powerful tool, I believe, that they can put in their toolbox to help them develop as writers and to develop fantastic stories. Also, if you would, please go to my website at mark-graham.com, sign up for the newsletter. I'll keep you posted on what's happening with the runes and with my other writing endeavors. So thank you for your time and attention. I appreciate your support. So I am Mark Graham with the Source of Story YouTube channel, Runes for Writers. I look forward to hearing about your story with the runes.